The moment Taylor Swift stepped onto the Graham Norton show stage, the audience erupted like a thunderstorm. The red couch, the signature laughter, and Graham's mischievous grin. It all seemed routine at first. But no one expected the night to turn into a cultural talking point that would dominate social media for days. Taylor was radiant, confident, calm, glowing in a classic black ensemble that made her look equal parts queen and warrior. She carried that relaxed energy of someone who knows she's untouchable. As she waved at the roaring crowd and took her seat next to Graham, the applause didn't fade. It grew louder. The camera cut to her smile, the kind that hides 100 thoughts behind perfect poise. "Taylor Swift, everybody," Graham announced, raising his hand to quiet the audience. Singer, songwriter, global icon, and I hear not afraid to stir things up a little these days. The crowd laughed. Taylor chuckled softly, crossing her legs, tilting her head with that trademark composure. "Only when people deserve it," she said, her tone light but deliberate. The laughter was quick and sharp, and so was the tension. Graham's eyes widened playfully. "Oh, that's the kind of line that gets you trending in about 6 seconds, he teased. Taylor shrugged, flashing a small grin. "Then it'll be a productive 6 seconds. The room erupted. The band hit a quick riff, and the studio audience could barely stay seated. It was one of those moments, casual, funny, but layered with meaning. Taylor wasn't there to promote a scandal. She was there to remind everyone why her words still owned every conversation long after she left the stage. The show continued with its usual rhythm. Graham asked about her upcoming tour, her new projects, and her evolution as an artist. Taylor answered with grace and ease, switching between humor and sincerity, like she'd been doing talk shows since birth. But then came the question, the one that changed everything. "So, Taylor," Graham began, flipping his card dramatically, "you've had one of the most scrutinized careers on earth. You've been adored, criticized, analyzed, and sometimes unfairly judged. How do you stay calm when people try to, let's say, play the victim and twist your narrative?" The audience reacted instantly, laughter, oohs, and a few claps. They knew Graham loved stirring the pot. But Taylor's expression didn't change. She smiled just slightly and leaned forward. "Well," she said softly, "I've learned something about that. Some people love the spotlight until it gets too bright. And then suddenly, they call it an interrogation." The audience gasped, then burst into laughter and applause. Graham leaned back, his eyes wide, chuckling. "Oh, that's sharp," he said, waving at the camera. "That's dangerously sharp." Taylor smiled again, calm as ever. "I don't mean anyone specifically," she said smoothly. "But there's a difference between being in the public eye and pretending to be a victim of it. You can't have the crown and then complain about its weight." The eruption was instant. The crowd shouted, clapped, and laughed in disbelief. Graham leaned forward, still laughing but clearly taken aback. "You realize you just wrote tomorrow's headlines, right?" Taylor shrugged with that nonchalant grace that only comes from experience. "It's fine," she said. "People love to guess who I'm talking about. It keeps them entertained." The audience roared again. It wasn't just loud applause. It was electric. Even Graham, who thrived on chaotic moments, sat back, shaking his head with a grin. "Well, I wasn't expecting this kind of sermon tonight," he joked. Taylor tilted her head, her tone light but firm. "It's not a sermon," she said. "It's just observation. I think a lot of people confuse fame with victimhood. And I think sometimes people forget that being misunderstood doesn't automatically make you the good guy." There was no laughter this time, just stunned silence, followed by thunderous applause. The audience knew what she was doing. She didn't name anyone. She didn't have to. The crowd's reaction said it all. Graham tried to recover. "You're dangerously good at this," he said, smiling. Taylor smirked. "It's not dangerous if it's true." And that was the line, the one that set social media ablaze. The clip went viral within hours of the show airing. It flooded TikTok, YouTube, and X, edits, reaction videos, and commentaries, all dissecting those few seconds of poised destruction. Fans dubbed it the polite takedown. They didn't say her name. They didn't have to. The internet filled in the blanks. For the first time in a long while, The Graham Norton Show trended, not for its comedy, but for a cultural moment, one that felt less like a TV interview and more like a statement. Taylor Swift hadn't mentioned Meghan Markle, but in a few calm, measured sentences, she reminded everyone how power really speaks. Softly, precisely, and only once. Within minutes of the show airing, the internet caught fire. Clips of Taylor's calm, surgical comments began flooding social feeds. Short, edited cuts captioned with phrases like the crown and the weight speech. Taylor said what we're all thinking, and the classiest takedown ever. By sunrise, the full interview had been clipped, subtitled, remixed, and re-uploaded across every major platform. TikTok creators dissected her tone, the way she smiled slightly before delivering her line, and how Graham Norton had raised his eyebrows just enough to show he knew exactly what she was implying. One clip alone, the one where she said, "You can't have the crown and complain about his weight," crossed 20 million views in less than 12 hours. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the subtlety that made it devastating. Taylor didn't name anyone. She didn't need to. The comment sections turned into debates. Thousands of users began quoting her line as if it were gospel. Some called it poetic justice. Others described it as the most diplomatic shade in talk show history. Major entertainment outlets picked it up instantly. Headlines like "Taylor Swift's Graham Norton moment sparked speculation" dominated every feed. Others were more direct. "Swift takes aim at modern victim culture. Fans think they know who she means." Inside the BBC offices, the Graham Norton Show producers couldn't believe it. What was supposed to be a lighthearted episode had turned into a global headline. The ratings team reported that the segment's online traction had exceeded every previous episode that season. Taylor's team didn't comment. They didn't post. They didn't clarify. Her silence was louder than a press release, and that's what made it work. By late afternoon, journalists were replaying the footage frame by frame, noting how Graham had leaned back after the line, laughing, but observing the crowd's reaction. Realizing the audience wasn't just laughing, they were cheering. One columnist wrote, "Swift didn't aim to humiliate anyone. She simply reminded everyone that authenticity still carries more power than excuses." But on social media, the conversation was far less polite. Twitter threads lit up with side-by-side clips comparing Taylor's words to Meghan Markle's previous interviews about fame, privacy, and misunderstanding. Some users called it poetic karma. Others argued people were reading too much into it. But the more fans tried to decode it, the more viral it became. The entire world was suddenly discussing integrity, image, and accountability, all sparked by a few words delivered on a crimson couch under studio lights. And for Taylor, that was the point. She didn't need to raise her voice or start a feud. The composure was the message. By the next day, the wave had turned into a storm. Morning shows replayed the moment, with commentators pausing every second to analyze her tone. Talk radio hosts quoted her line, calling it the most polite middle finger in pop culture history. On YouTube, long-form breakdowns titled, "Why Taylor Swift's Graham Norton Speech Hit So Hard" appeared by the dozens. Analysts slowed the footage, zooming in on her expression when she said, "pretending to be a victim." They noted the precision, the timing between Graham's question and her response, the pause before her smirk, and the way the crowd leaned forward just before they burst into laughter. Even Graham himself mentioned it briefly on his podcast the following week. He called it the moment the entire room felt something shift. He laughed, adding, "Taylor knows how to handle a microphone better than anyone I've met." You could see it. She wasn't attacking. She was reclaiming the tone of the room. Fans rallied behind that interpretation. The hashtag the crown and the weight trended worldwide for 2 days straight. People used it to post about self-respect, personal boundaries, and celebrity accountability. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It had become a cultural slogan. The clip even made its way into late-night monologues. Other hosts played it during their own shows, joking that even when Taylor throws shade, she does it in perfect rhythm. But perhaps the most remarkable reaction came from outside her fan base. Writers from politics, culture, and psychology columns weighed in, saying Taylor had exposed something bigger than celebrity drama, the idea that in the age of oversharing, power lies in composure, not confession. She had done it in less than 30 seconds, without raising her voice, without anger, and without naming anyone. Meanwhile, online, speculation refused to die. Every publication ran think pieces. Every YouTube channel uploaded reaction videos. Every fan base had theories. Was it about Meghan? Was it about Hollywood hypocrisy? No one could agree, and that's exactly why it worked. Because the moment you had to ask who she meant, she had already won. The following weekend, when Taylor performed in London, fans screamed a line back at her during a break in her set. She smiled, shook her head, and simply mouthed, "You remembered?" And that became the closing scene of the story. Taylor Swift set her stage, the crowd echoing her words, her voice steady and serene. She didn't start a feud. She didn't fan rumors. She just told the truth and let the world decide what to do with it. Sure thing. Here's a continuation written as a long-form entertainment recap, rather than a factual report. It keeps the same TV show rhythm and narrative tone that you've been using. By the following week, the clip had become impossible to avoid. Every talk show desk, every digital column, every morning panel had the same still image on its monitor. Taylor on the crimson couch, hands folded over her knee, that faint half-smile caught under the studio lights. News producers called it the silence that launched 1,000 headlines. Commentators replayed it during breakfast television with voiceovers like sports analysts dissecting a decisive goal. Notice the pause here. One host said, pointing at the moment just before she delivered the crown and weight line. She lets the air hang for half a second, then drops it like punctuation. Cultural critics weighed in next. A British columnist wrote that the exchange had reset the bar for how stars handle provocation by refusing to flinch. American magazines ran covers that read "The Power of Composure," pairing Taylor's still frame beside captions about authenticity. Inside streaming headquarters, producers clipped the interview into digestible segments. Platforms noticed a watch time curve. Viewers weren't skipping. They were rewatching. The numbers told a story of fascination, not controversy. Even musicians chimed in. A veteran singer tweeted, "That's how you do media. Calm, precise, lethal." Another joked. She didn't drop a single name, yet everyone heard theirs. Meanwhile, inside the BBC editing suites, Graham Norton's staff were overwhelmed by requests from networks wanting to license the segment. One assistant producer described the inbox as a digital avalanche. When the next episode aired, Graham opened jokingly, "We've upgraded our couch to fire-resistant fabric, just in case anyone else decides to ignite the internet." The audience roared. The show's ratings spiked again. But beyond the jokes, a serious conversation began to surface. Commentators started asking why a measured statement about accountability had resonated so widely. A sociologist on a news panel explained it simply, because people are exhausted by performance. They're craving composure, someone who doesn't chase sympathy, who owns their choices. The irony was sharp. Taylor hadn't delivered a campaign or a confession. She had delivered a sentence, and that sentence now carried more cultural weight than any planned interview all year. Weeks later, the moment still lingered. The memes had faded, but the phrase, the crown, and the weight remained a shortcut in online language, used whenever someone wanted to describe taking responsibility without self-pity. At music festivals, fans held up cardboard crowns, painted gold with that quote scrolled across them. Journalists called it a motto masquerading as gossip. Industry insiders noticed a shift, too. PR strategists referenced the Graham Norton appearance and presentations, labeling it a case study in controlled authenticity. Brands began echoing the tone in their ads, soft colors, short sentences, calm confidence. One analyst remarked, "Taylor did in 20 seconds what marketing departments spend years attempting." She turned restraint into a spectacle. Graham himself addressed the fallout during a backstage interview months later. "She never raised her voice," he said. "That's why it worked. People confuse shouting with strength. She just didn't need to." Behind the scenes, the show framed it as a benchmark moment. Interns were told to tag it whenever compiling highlight reels. The director even had the exact timestamp, 17 minutes, 23 seconds, memorized. By the time award season rolled around, that single clip appeared in montage after montage celebrating iconic television moments of the year. Each time the line played, the crowd applauded, not because it was scandalous, but because it had become cultural shorthand for poise. And somewhere on a later tour stop, during a quiet acoustic set, Taylor paused between songs and looked out at the sea of lights. Someone in the front row held up a sign that read, "It's not the crown, it's the weight." She smiled slowly, knowingly, and said into the mic, "Funny how one little sentence can travel farther than a melody." The crowd erupted, singing the next song before she could even start it. That was a legacy of a night on the Graham Norton Show, a masterclass in calm defiance. No arguments, no names, no drama, just a reminder that in a world built on noise, the quietest voice still carries the farthest.